That 911 phone call has been dissected by many analysts and many people, and guess what? We're going to talk about it right now because joining me, I'm so happy Monday, Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor is here with me right now. Hi, good morning, Jonna.
Good morning, Jesse.
Now, is there anything about that 911 phone call that strikes you as odd?
Aside from the entire thing?
Well, what do you mean? What strikes you as odd?
Well, first of all, let me say, it's really hard to listen to. It really is, because, you know, not because I have any sympathy for her, but because she reveals in that phone call that she kind of had a chance to maybe administer some help to the boyfriend before he was completely dead, but instead she treated him like roadkill and shot him a couple more times. That really, I don't think that's going to sit well with the jury either, but there's something obviously really off. This is a case of hell has no fury like a woman scorned.
Oh, we're going to talk about that in 1 second, about what means by her being scorned. But before we get there, have you ever seen a case where somebody fires into another individual? They can claim self-defense, but they finish them off. They finish them off and say, listen, they were about to die. I didn't want them to be any more pain. It's still self-defense. Have you ever seen a case where that worked?
No. And as a matter of fact, when we have other murder cases where the defendant is trying to claim self-defense and there are multiple wounds, whether stab, gunshot, doesn't matter, and depending on where they are in the body, most of the time when it's overkill, no pun intended, that does not help the defendant's theory of the case that it's self-defense. This is one of those cases.
Now, you heard what Jonna said a moment ago. What was it? Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. We don't know what exactly happened that night. The defendant is saying there was a struggle. They were trying to break up. But here's another interesting tidbit. We learned last week that Ryan Poston had a date that night. And not just a date with anybody else. A date with Miss Ohio. And this became really interesting because we believe not only was he excited about the date, but he was planning to tell Miss Hubers that he was going on this date as a breakup, probably. Well, we know that the night that he was going to meet her, he didn't get to do that because he was killed. So let's find out how this all unfolded from Miss Ohio herself.
Had you all originally planned to meet earlier in the evening?
Yes.
And why did you not?
I was late.
Okay. Did you have a family event or something, or what
Yes. I was held up at a family event prior, and then we agreed to meet a little bit later in the evening.
Okay. Was there some discussion about what Mr. Poston should wear?
Yes.
Can you please tell the jury if you remember what? Was he at work at the time you were talking?
Yes.
It was during business hours?
Yes.
And what was the discussion about his clothing?
It was something of the nature of, like, he was going to go to a local dive bar, and he said, you know, should I wear my suit? And I'm like, oh, you know, you can probably tone it down if you want to.
Okay, so you all discussed him changing his clothes.
Correct.
And I believe you said you got caught up at a family funeral. Did you all, because of that, have to bump back your plans to meet?
Yes.
And do you know approximately what time you were ultimately going to meet, despite your what you time originally settled on? I'm sorry, I keep messing that up. What time you all ultimately settled on? Approximate, if you remember.
I believe it was around like 9 o'clock, and I definitely pushed it back an hour or plus more.
Okay, so you think you all were probably planning to meet sometime in the 10:30 hour?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And Miss Bolte, I'll just cut to the chase. Did you go to meet Ryan?
He didn't show up.
But you went.
Yeah. Yes.
Where did you go? Where did you all agree to meet?
We agreed to meet at like a gas station that was like nearby at first, and then I didn't hear from him, and so I just went to the place to kind of like see if maybe it was bad communication, and I kind of like looked around a little bit, but he wasn't there.
Did you wait?
Yeah.
Did Ryan ever show?
No.
And did you ever hear from Ryan again?
No.
Nothing further at this time.
Thank you. Pretty incredible for Miss Ohio to feel that she was going to go on a date that night, and now she's testifying in a murder trial, the second time that she did so. Remember, this is a retrial of Miss Hubers. I want to bring back in Jonna Spilbor to ask you this question. Do you believe that what precipitated this shooting was him telling her that he was going on a date with her later that night?
I believe what precipitated this shooting was her insane jealousy. So whether he actually got the words out of his mouth that night, maybe we don't know, She probably caught wind of it. He was breaking up with her. She didn't want to be broken up with. And there was one way to make that not happen in her mind, and that was killing him in cold blood.
She claims self-defense. She claims she was thrown around the apartment, the condominium that night, even though the evidence would suggest otherwise. My question is, why was there a loaded gun? He was obviously a gun enthusiast. Why was there even a loaded gun? Not just a gun, but it was loaded, ready to fire. Why?
Right.
Maybe that's the only thing I think might be strong in her self-defense case.
Well, you know, I'm going to beg to differ. I have a concealed carry permit, and if you have guns for self-protection, listen, if somebody breaks into my house in the middle of the night, it's going to take me a lot longer to fumble to load my gun than it is to reach over and grab a loaded gun that might have the safety on in order to defend myself. So it's not uncommon for gun owners to keep a loaded gun nearby. Where he made a mistake is he knew that she was not stable. She was coming over. Don't have your loaded guns unlocked where she could get her hands on them.
She's claiming it was on the kitchen table.
I doubt it.
You're saying you think that it was hidden somewhere and she just picked it up.
Yeah, that's what I think. That's my theory. He was an attorney. I don't blame him for having a gun, but he should have kept it locked up whenever anybody was in the house.
Well, you know what we also learned last week? We learned that based upon the evidence, he was probably in a seated position and not a standing position when he was first shot, which would go against that self-defense theory. We also learned that she was at very, I think, intermediate range within him, 6 to 30 inches away, pretty close, and fired at him from a downward angle. These are all things that don't quite help her case. We will talk more about the Shayna Huber's trial as we continue here on Law and Crime, but when we come back, we have to discuss the Roy Oliver case out of Texas and try to understand why a young 15-year-old young man died. We'll be right back. Okay, we need to break down. That's the whole event right there. I want to bring back in Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, when you look at that, is there anything that in your mind would say, those officers were in danger and the use of lethal force may have been reasonable?
So we just watched it just like a jury would be watching that. And I actually said to you off the air, how can anybody possibly look at that vehicle and think it's coming toward the person with the body camera? Listen, I know it's a chaotic event, gunshots, the cops are trying to do their jobs, but objectively, that vehicle is clearly moving away from the scene, not toward. And we hear an officer screaming, stop the car, stop that car. So for whatever reason, that officer wanted that car stopped and then shoots into it. This is problematic for the defense.
Yeah, okay, they might have thought that that car had something to do with the gunshots that were fired. You heard the gunshots being fired.
Yeah.
Chaotic scene. Your officers are running towards it. But why would he just open fire on that car? And you know what's interesting? He says he was trying to hit you. Almost like a confirmation, not even a question. Was he trying to hit you? He was trying to hit you.
Yeah, and that's something that the jury's also going to have to wrestle with, because it would have almost been better if in this, we have to apply the reasonable person standard. If this officer had perceived maybe gunfire coming from that car, which is why he would be screaming, stop that car, stop that car.
Right.
He may have been justified at that point shooting into the vehicle. But don't simply say, I shot it because I thought it was going to hit you, when the body camera footage clearly shows it's going in the opposite direction.
The body cam footage is great, but you will, as you know, there's a lot of people out there that night. So I want to play the testimony of Reginald Mickens, a key witness who saw Officer Oliver running into the street firing. Take a look. Pretty emotional testimony right there, and we are going to break that down in a minute, but I just want to let you know that we are live right now in the Roy Oliver case. The jury is not present. A witness is being questioned right now, Grant Fredericks, a forensic video analyst. You might remember him. He was brought in to testify in the Ray Tenson case, which we also covered here on Law and Crime, another officer-related shooting case. We'll talk about that. We will jump live a little bit later, but just wanted to let you know that that's happening. I want to talk about what we just saw, though, with Jonna Spilbor. Having a witness on the stand, a young witness, somebody who was in the car, break down on the stand because his friend died, what impact does that have on the jury?
It's heartbreaking, and I'm sure the jurors are going to feel very sympathetically toward this witness. Excuse me. It does not help the defense at all. I mean, those are real tears. Those aren't tears that he's not putting on a show here. And you know what it does? It bolsters the fact that this was a car full of kids. A car full of kids. One of them ended up dead. Shouldn't have been. And it's just a heartbreaking element to this case.
Yeah, the reality, the humanizing what happened. None of the jury members knew Jordan Edwards, but you're getting a glimpse into who he was and what happened that night. Again, as I keep saying, we're trying to understand why this happened. We know who did it, we know how it happened, but now we want to know why. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about Roy Oliver. Stay tuned. Pretty incredible stuff when you're listening to the witnesses who were actually in the car on the night of the shooting. Want to bring back in Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. That is a live feed, by the way, that we have on the right. Nothing is happening as of yet, but if something should happen, we'll make sure to jump back in that courtroom. Want to talk to you, Jonna, about this. The evidence right now is pretty significant against Mr. Oliver.
Yeah.
What does the defense have to do? What kind of witnesses do they have to bring forward?
Honestly, I think they have to bring the defendant forward. I think he's going to have to testify about what exactly was going through his mind, and if he can, explain why he thought this vehicle was going to harm his partner, which brings in the defense of others defense, when clearly it's going in the opposite direction. The jury's going to need to hear from him. I know that's very tricky, but I don't see how. He's got to explain that.
Yeah, he really does. And I'm curious, is there any witness that we should say, hey, listen, let's look at his service record. He's never taken his gun out before. He wasn't a trigger-happy officer. Would that help?
I think if they do that, that's going to open the door, because we know behind the scenes, the prosecution wants to get in a road rage incident that happened with this officer off duty. And we don't want to open, if you're defending him, you don't want to open that door and allow that to come in, because so far the judge has said no, that's not allowed.
Yeah, and that sounds like it wouldn't help his case too much. Let's play you some of the testimony of Jeremy Seaton. This is a friend of Jordan Edwards. He testified last week and provided some very, very interesting testimony about what he saw in regards to the shooting. Take a look. That witness is important, not only because he saw the shooting in question, but he actually saw who fired some of those 10 to 12, 15 gunshots at that nursing home. He saw it. And guess who didn't fire the weapon? Jordan Edwards or anybody in that car. Let's bring back in Jonna Spilbor to talk about that. That's a big fact. Those guys in the car had nothing to do with that shooting that brought those officers out there.
Yeah, which again, so back to my previous point, we've got the car backing away, not coming toward the officers. We have plenty of witnesses who know for a fact that the victim in this case didn't fire any gun. No weapons were being fired there. We need a reason. People, we need to know what was going through this officer's mind at the time he decided to open fire inside that car. And the only one who's going to be able to give us an explanation is the defendant himself.
I'm very curious, though, is the standard what was going on in his mind, or what would a reasonable person have done?
So it's a reasonable person standard, but we have to know whether what was going on in the defendant's mind was indeed reasonable. For example, totally speculating here, what if he took the stand and said, listen, I thought I felt a bullet whiz by my head coming from the direction of that car, and at that moment I decided to open fire. Then it might excuse his actions and provide the defense that he's talking about here.
Based upon what you're saying, Jonna, seems more and more likely that this man will take the stand, and we've seen that happen a lot of times. We talked about the Ray Tenson case earlier on. He took the stand, and I think it was 2 mistrials, and they eventually dropped the charges. We'll have to see what happens here. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, a lot more to discuss in the Roy Oliver case out of Texas. Stay tuned. Wow, incredible. Another witness talking about what happened that night. And now I want to see if the defense has an avenue here. I want to bring back in Jonna Spilbor to talk about this. We've heard a lot of witnesses talking about what happened in the car. They saw things from outside of the car. Keep friends of the victim. Has anybody said anything inconsistent? Have their stories been inconsistent, which is what we see a lot of times in kind of these shootings where there's a lot of different witnesses. Has there anything inconsistent that the defense can jump on?
No, there doesn't seem to be any wild card witnesses thus far for the prosecution, which is good for the prosecution.
Right.
And really the only way to attack that, if you're a defense counsel, is to try to determine how many conversations did they have with the prosecution before they took the stand. maybe they are well coached. You have to remember, there's no attorney-client privilege between a witness and the prosecution. They don't represent witnesses. So all that information is fair game if the defense wants to go there.
Okay, that's a good point. We'll have to see what the defense ultimately does. What I want to do is jump into our live feed in the Roy Oliver case. On the stand right now is Grant Fredericks, a forensic video analyst. He's talking a little bit about the study of this. Let's go in live. Okay, so this is a live feed into the Roy Oliver case. Let's talk a little bit more about it with Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, help me out. I'm not a smart guy. What's the point of having this witness here without the jury present? He's talking a lot about video analysis. What's the point?
So thankfully the jury is not present, because if they were present, they'd be napping. This is a lot of math. What this expert is here to testify about is to make sure that the method by which they're analyzing this video is generally accepted in the scientific community, so that it can be a reliable source of evidence when and if he testifies in front of the jury.
Are you surprised when you speak to people who are not familiar with the law how technical a trial actually is? Are they surprised by that?
Oh, it can be so technical, and you have to prepare your jury for that the moment you start voir dire. You've got to prep them that this is going to require some, maybe heady calculations or some other technicalities. You've got to prepare them for that right out of the gate.
So it's not easy being an attorney, it's not easy being a defendant, it's not easy being a witness, and it's not easy sitting on a jury, let alone in this kind of case. When we come back, we'll be live in Roy Oliver. You know, as we look at this witness, you can't help but think the power of that body cam footage. I'm here with the Jonna Spilbor. Isn't that the whole reason that officers now have body cams? For this very reason?
Well, for this very reason, and you kind of hope that it works to absolve officers, bless you, in the course and scope of their duties. But in this case, it seems like the body cam footage is doing precisely the opposite.
I mean, it really is. It's such an important piece of evidence, and it's pretty clear. You see how the events unfold there. You made a good point. I know we have about 20 seconds. Why did he go back to get his rifle? He has a service weapon.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know why he thought it would be better to shoot into a vehicle that was a danger with a rifle as opposed to what was on his hip. He's going to have to explain that too when he hopefully takes the stand.
And that's what we're waiting to see eventually, if this man takes the stand. We'll take a quick break on our end. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. So we are just waiting for something more interesting to happen in the courtroom right now. Nothing too much to happen here, but I want to bring back in Jonna Spilbor to talk about this. So you see the guy all the way on the right with the shaved head. That's the defendant. Jonna, can the defense win their case without putting that man, the defendant, on the stand?
From where we are right now, I don't see how that's possible, because the only person who's going to be able to explain away why he did what he did, why he shot at a vehicle that was driving away, and perhaps not a threat as he initially asserted, only person who can explain that is that man right there, the defendant. I don't see how we get around this issue without him testifying.
I wonder if they have any witnesses, though, that saw the opposite of what a lot of the witnesses saw that night, right? So we've seen a combination of witnesses, both people who were in the car with Jordan Edwards, people who were living nearby, people that went to the party. They're all testifying to the same thing. They saw something that didn't make sense to them. Do you think anybody they can bring out and say, hey, I saw the car backing up, or you know what? That officer, I looked like he almost got hit. Do you think they have anything like that?
You know, maybe if somebody were walking down the street and weren't involved in that house party, because so far the people who went to that party or were in that party have very consistently said they all saw the same thing, and what they saw does not help this defendant.
Well, I think the witness is talking now. Let's go live into the courtroom right now. Okay, an important witness trying to understand what's happening with that videotape, but unfortunately, I have to sign off. Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, thank you so much for coming on this morning.
Always a pleasure. This is really a fascinating case, so I'm sure we'll talk more about it.
Oh, we're going to have you on more, and maybe if the defendant takes the stand, we'll have you on that day to talk more about it.
Gotta be here for that, Jesse.
Of course. All right, Jonna, thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to take a break on our end, and when we come back, a lot more Roy Oliver, and we will also update you in the Shayna Huber's case. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime.